All right, so what are the take-homes from our field day site, and what things did we see that really worked or really appeared to be working in the summer? You know, the first thing that jumps out to me is nitrogen stabilizers. As we mentioned, we had a heavy rainfall, really month of June. We got more rain in June of this year than we got last year, the entire year, and in 2012, the entire year. And we used a lot of nitrogen stabilizer in different plots here on the farm. We were focused on products like Instinct and Nutrisphere N and some of these other nitrogen stabilizers. They really stood out. I mean, where guys in our plots used the nitrogen stabilizers versus where we didn't, that stood out to me as a big payback.
Okay, we also had the new Ingenuity, basically the dicamba soybeans on our farm. So it's a regulated plot and everything. We had to keep people out of this area. It was interesting and fun to see, but two things stood out to me on that. Number one, that a full pint of Clarity wasn't controlling water hemp that was a foot tall. Now, sure, it was controlling the small water hemp, no problem. But a lot of guys were amazed when they walked through and they saw, well, I thought you sprayed Clarity here. Yeah, we did. At a full pint? Yep. Well, how come the weeds aren't dead? Exactly. So if you think that Clarity is going to be the same thing as going out with Roundup when Roundup first came out, where you could kill great big weeds, think again. And then the other thing along with that is that both Monsanto and BASF are telling people no more ammonium sulfate. If you're going to use ammonium sulfate, it should be just with the straight Roundup or other products. But when you put that ammonium sulfate together with any dicamba product, for some reason, something happens chemically and you get more volatility and possibly even a little bit more drift.
All right, the other thing I took away from that plot, Brian, was with the new Ingenuity formulation, and Monsanto will have their own formulation of dicamba they're going to be marketing. But with that Ingenuity formulation, we had lentils, we had canola, we had susceptible crops. We didn't have any injury at all in these susceptible crops. They were sitting basically just to the west of where the Ingenuity was being sprayed. So I was very happy with that. You know, if we were spraying the old Banville, I wouldn't have been so confident about that vapor drift that could have hurt the crops.
One of the big things I noticed this year, and this comes back to some stuff Darren said earlier in the show about putting nutrients on in a spoon feed or even nitrogen stabilizers. We saw our corn on corn this year in the plots where we didn't have ample early nitrogen. That corn fell behind, in part because we've come off of 2 drought years. So there wasn't a lot of soil moisture unless you had very sufficient nitrogen early on. And keep in mind, in corn on corn, a lot of the bacteria, they're breaking down residue. There's not a good carbon and nitrogen ratio in that corn on corn stubble, that corn on corn residue. So the bacteria are using soil nitrogen in part for food until they get that residue broken down. So we're having major problems with that where we don't apply ample nitrogen early in the season in dry conditions in corn on corn. That stood out to me in this year's field day.
One thing that stood out in corn, soybeans, and wheat is micronutrients. It's interesting to me as I talk to a lot of the high yield growers around the country that were at our field day and guys that call into our radio show regularly. They all talk about micronutrients and how critical they are to so many different processes in the plant. We saw it as we got dry. In the month of July for us, we saw virtually no rain. I thought the plots really separated themselves where we had ample supplies of micronutrients. We had a lot better stress tolerance in the crop. That made a big difference and stood out to me.
One of the other big things that I saw at the field day, and we've talked about this a lot on Ag PhD, is having 3 different modes of action pre-emergent soybeans because the soybean post products are just not very good. Sure, Flex Star and Cobra and those products can kill some weeds, but if anybody put 3 pre's down in soybeans, we didn't even have to spray a post product and the field was still looking pretty clean. But the fewer number of pre's they put out, so when it dropped to 2 you had more weeds, when it dropped to 1 pre there were a lot more weeds. That was a big deal. There were a lot of great things we picked up from this year's field day. Next year's field day is July 30th, 2015. If you'd like to join us, it's a free event. It'll be a lot of fun and we'll have lots of plots again and a lot of high yield producers there. Well, one of the important things if you want high yield is controlling our weed of the week. We'll talk about it coming up next.